This is Erin Cloud and Alex Cook with another Psychological and Brain Sciences Department podcast. Today we are here with Dr. Matthew Vess, a social and personality professor here at Texas A&M.
Hello.
Dr. Vess, what classes do you teach?
I'm currently teaching social psychology here, but in the past I've taught a course on the self, I've taught graduate courses on social psychology, I've taught research methods. That's actually all I've ever taught.
Okay. How would you describe your teaching style?
Enthusiastic. That's the overall, like on my reviews, that's what students tend to say is I'm enthusiastic. I like to bring humor in a sort of laid back atmosphere. So I really like to create an environment where students feel like they can talk freely and share ideas. And humor tends to be a good way to do that. I think once people are laughing, they're more likely to remain engaged. So that's the other way I would describe it.
What would you say your philosophy of teaching is?
My philosophy of teaching is certainly to communicate the concepts and ideas that are critical and make sure students understand them. But I think in large part that's achieved through application. So I try to do things where students are asked to apply a particular concept in their own lives or in some current event. And that helps me sort of see how they're thinking about it, whether or not they're thinking about it correctly. But I also think that enables students to use knowledge, which is ultimately the goal. I think my philosophy is I don't really see the point of teaching anything that isn't going to be used. Because for me, the purpose of knowing something is to use it in some way, to improve or achieve some goal. So my teaching philosophy is very much, I think, pragmatic in the sense I'm trying to get people to a place where they can use what they're learning.
Okay. Could you tell us about your teaching experiences?
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean?
Where have you taught?
Okay.
Yeah.
So several places now. So I went to graduate school at the University of Missouri. I was a teaching fellow there towards the end of my graduate school career. And as part of the teaching fellow, you took a class where you got to sort of learn how to be a college level instructor. I started teaching research methods there, so I taught 2 classes as a graduate student. Then I got a job at Ohio University, and while I was at Ohio, I taught social psychology, research methods at the undergraduate level, and then in the graduate level, I taught seminars, which are smaller classes where most of the class time is spent on discussion rather than sort of lecture. I taught courses in social psychology, a current topics class, which are kind of fun. So the idea there is you're just pulling current research or current theories in the field and playing around with the ideas a little bit rather than just focusing on the foundation of a particular field. I also taught a course on existential psychology at the graduate level there. And then, so Ohio University, just context, is probably a mid-level. I used to think it was big, and then I came to Texas A&M, and it's a mid-level, so there's about 26 or 27,000 students. I left Ohio and went to Montana State, which I think would be a smaller university. It's about 16,000 students. And there I also taught research methods and social psych at the graduate level. I also taught a seminar course on the self, which was kind of fun. Again, it was an undergraduate course, but for an advanced student. And then I came here.
If you could teach any course you wanted, what would it be and why?
Oh man, that's a good question. I like teaching a course on the self. I'm hoping to design that course and get it approved here so that I can start teaching it in the near future. The self to me is one of the more interesting topics in psychology. But I always kind of had this like desire to co-teach a class with people in departments other than psychology. So if you take a class like the Self, there are certainly like very strong philosophical traditions that have dealt with the self, and there are certainly I think like cognitive neuroscience approaches to studying consciousness that are involved, and then even in literature, like a lot of popular books, a lot of movies deal with the idea of finding yourself and figuring out who you are. So I've always kind of envisioned or played around with the idea of co-teaching a class where the course is like sort of broke down. It's like it's all around the topic of the self, but it's like this like multiple perspective and multiple approach to studying it. Organizationally, it's never quite. I haven't been able to figure out how everyone would get appropriate credit for teaching a course like that, where they're only teaching parts of it. But I would love to do that.
That sounds fun.
I think it would be neat.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's the type of class I would have loved as a student. And I guess if we circle back to teaching philosophy, like we all sort of do what we experience and what we like. That tends to be what we're sort of oriented to. And Ohio, so I graduated from Ohio University, and one of the courses you had to take was what was called a Tier 3 class. And that class wasn't quite what I just described, but it was this idea that you would take a class that is in a particular discipline, but it's being taught by someone from a different discipline. So I took a course on existential philosophy because that's kind of what I was into, but it was taught by an English professor. So it was a slightly different take on existentialism, but it was sort of existentialism through the lens of literature, which I thought it was a cool idea and it was neat and fun. So yeah, I would love to do something like that down the line.
That's great. Can you tell us about your own research interests?
Yeah, I mean, I think my research interests are kind of following what I just was describing. So I study how people construct and maintain a sense of meaning in life, a sense of who they are. So ultimately, it's about how people resolve these like very big existential questions about their lives and their existence. Yeah. That's the elevator pitch.
Can you tell us how your research has influenced your teaching, and in what ways you've been able to bring the insights of your research to your courses at the undergraduate level?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a class like research methods, it's sometimes pretty easy because I use examples from my own research to introduce the ideas of like an independent variable. And so I'm an experimental social psychologist, so basic experiments where we're manipulating things. I think studying the resolution of existential issues, you're studying very abstract variables. And so figuring out ways to measure those variables in an accurate and sort of consistent way is sometimes challenging. So in a course like research methods, my work, I think, provides some good illustrations of some of the challenges that researchers in psychology face, and unique challenges relative to fields like physics and chemistry, where you can just, pour an amount of the chemical in a nice little beaker that measures it out perfectly. We can't do that. So we have to be somewhat creative. And then in social psychology, so one of the frameworks that my work pulls from is this broad theory known as terror management theory, and I use that theory to organize a large portion of the class. So there, certainly like sort of my research perspective is influencing the way I think about what social psychology is, unless that's the way I end up teaching the course.
Okay, how do you involve graduate and undergraduate students in your research?
Certainly not yet. I'm still building my lab here. But starting next semester, there's certainly be opportunities for positions, research assistant positions. Is it 491?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
485 and 491.
Yeah. So those two courses. While I was at Montana State, I was fortunate to recruit some really good undergraduates. And the way I sort of include undergraduates in my work is, there's sort of a minimum expectation of their level of involvement, learning how to run the studies, appropriately conducting the research. But then I also provide opportunities for them to be more involved if they want to see or be involved in discussions of how we develop hypotheses and design the studies. I sort of leave that up to the student. And so while I was at Montana State, I published a paper that an undergraduate was first author on. It was her idea, and kind of ran the study, and she did a really nice job, and she got her paper published. We're in the process of a different student. We're in the process of putting a paper together that she'll be first author on and write up. So I've had some experiences, some really rewarding experiences working with undergraduates where they were able to get involved beyond the superficial and sort of think about their own ideas. And they've been successful, so that's good. Graduate students, I tend to think of graduate students as more like colleagues. So initially, the idea is that they're, sort of learning how we do research in the frameworks that I operate in. But by, the second or third year, I'm expecting them to have lots of ideas and be designing appropriate studies. And, I think of it more in terms, like almost like an organization where I'm sort of the CEO, and we have managers who would be the graduate students, and the undergraduates would be underneath the graduate students who are carrying out the tasks. And my goal is to just make sure that everything is organized and working efficiently. And I've been lucky to have good students, and typically that's how it tumbles out.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Vess. We'll be back with another interesting insight into the faculty of the Psychological and Brain Sciences Department.